Hi, my name is Steve.
Hi, I'm Joe Zieja. I'm I guess, sort of multidisciplinary Renaissance man of sorts. Probably best known for being a voice actor. I'm an author, ex-Air Force captain, and a dad.
You
Bunch of other
forgot
stuff.
like the bottle cap spin champion. Like that was
Bottle cap spin
yeah.
champion.
uh
Yes.
Honestly, I feel like that is your crowning achievement. I mean, I guess the kid thing probably whatever,
Fine. Paper football connoisseur, I guess, too.
Oh my gosh, Joe, we were talking before the recording here. We have been Tweety buddies forever. Finally getting to catch up.
Yes, it's an absolute pleasure.
I appreciate you coming on here and wasting your time talking to me. It's fantastic.
No waste here.
I do love your positive attitude on Twitter. That's one of the reasons that I really brought you here is because you are so varied in what you do. You are the voice actor and the writer, but you're also somebody who just seems to try to have fun with life. And that's really kind of what I want to talk about today is your view on the world and how to make the most of it.
Sounds awesome.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with where were you born?
I was born in New Jersey, which is where I grew up. I spent the first 18 years of my life in New Jersey. And then when people think of New Jersey, it's not like I didn't grow up in Newark. I grew up in like a rural town. Had like 12,000 people and a movie theater in it. And that was pretty much it. I got really good at bowling because that was the only thing to do in town.
That was like the highlight of your Saturday night was bowling.
I'm not joking here. There were times where I went to bowl by myself just to go do something. So like they had this deal on Tuesdays where if you spent, God, I don't know, it was like you could rent a lane for like $10 an hour. So if you go and you spend $20, you could just bowl endlessly for 2 hours.
Wow, that actually sounds like not a bad deal, and not too far from how it was in Pittsburgh either. I think
yeah, there you
bowling
go.
Is just an East Coast thing. I don't know. I'm gonna get hate comments in the.
I mean,
West
there's plenty of
Coasters.
bowling alleys out here, but like I don't hear people talk about it.
No, I hear about laser bowling a lot these days.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, with lasers, why not? So who was mom and dad?
My mom and dad are. My dad was a firefighter. He was a firefighter the whole time I knew him. My mom didn't work in an office. She quit to take care of me and my brother when I was a baby.
Oh.
So before my brother was born, I got one younger brother. But she and my dad were always doing something. They had several like smaller businesses together. She was always in her office doing something. They shipped diaries, which were like planning books for the Financial Times and stuff like that. They had like a gold stamping business where they stamped those diaries for people. And then when I left, they started a flower shop for a little while.
Wow, so real entrepreneur kind of family.
Yeah, I mean, like my dad's job was always kind of like the base, and everything else sort of like circled around that. My dad liked to fix up houses when he could and stuff like that. So,
okay.
Yeah,
the real yin and the yang of the family. Okay, so
very much.
What way would you say that you were kind of leaning as a kid? Were you thinking you'd grow up and be a firefighter, or were you thinking you'd grow up and own the world?
You know, I never really thought about being a firefighter, and my dad never encouraged me to do it. In fact, I wonder if he would have encouraged me to do it had I like really talked about it. I don't know if he ever like discouraged me, like, don't do that. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a scientist. I didn't know what that was or like what kind of field of science, but like, the standard, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yep. I always answered scientist for a really long time.
Was that true, or is that just your out of the pocket
no,
answer?
It was total BS. I have no idea what I wanted to study or like where it just didn't make any sense.
I like it.
I didn't really think I was going to go into the military until I hit about 13. That's when I kind of got that idea.
So what drew you into the military?
We don't know. It's like a weird apocryphal story. I walked downstairs one day and I said, "Mom, I'm going to the Air Force Academy." She's like, "Do you know where it is?" And I was like, "Nope." And that was it. Like, neither of us remember any conversation before that. I have no real military heritage in the family. I mean, like, the generation above my parents was in the military, like most during the World War II time. But like, there's no pedigree. It was just kind of like this random idea that nobody in my family knows why I decided that.
Understandable.
It's weird.
As we were talking about on Twitter long ago, I really wanted to be in the Air Force and just never got the chance because of the disability. But thank you definitely for the service.
Yeah.
But I love that you sort of went into the armed forces and you ended up getting super buff, but you ended up not being like a bodybuilder. You're not somebody who goes out and pulls logs apart with your chest like Captain America. I mean, you might have, I don't know. But, you're kind of on the nerd side of life. You really seem to appreciate brain power.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, I would say, more mind-driven than body-driven. I mean, I've kept myself in shape just because I enjoy the things that I do. Although can't say I enjoy working out. I enjoy parkour, and I enjoyed, like, when I was in high school, I was a wrestler and a pole vaulter, and I enjoyed those things. But in general, it was more of like I feel my mind doesn't feel as good if I don't work out. Like, if I go some time without working out, I get like kind of grumpy. I'm not as focused. So I just like to keep it. It's more like a means to an end for keeping my brain sharp than it is, splitting logs.
Does that mental focus come into play with exercise, or is the exercise what keeps the mental focus? Chicken and the egg.
It's kind of like it's a cycle.
Yeah.
You definitely don't want to be not mentally focused while you're doing something like parkour. If you're jumping on like scaffolding and stuff like that, and you have this is your landing surface. It's about this thick. You need to be focused. But yeah, I think it cycles into itself for sure.
So we are at the Air Force point in your life, and then you decided to move on to doing all kinds of writing and creative activities in your life. When you came out of the Air Force and you were trying to look for what's next in your life, how was it transitioning from a mental standpoint of having this regimented thing where you did every day to the creative lifestyle, which is much more forgiving?
It was really odd in a lot of different ways. To be totally clear, I left the Air Force and then went into government contracting in the DC area. So there was like a 2-step transition, and I had no idea that I was going to be a full-time creative until maybe like a year into that government contract work. I had always thought that like writing books was what was going to get me out of the military about government work. And like, I knew I didn't want to be in a 9-to-5. I just didn't really know how I was going to get there. And then voice acting was kind of a surprise. But the mental transition was tough for a couple of reasons. You don't have that safety net of a government job. Like, in a government job, you gotta murder somebody to get fired. Like, the job security is outrageous. Yeah. So there was that security just kind of like fell away. And also your life's purpose kind of shifts. You go from being involved in counterterrorism for most of your adult life to like making fun of Russos. Like, it's like, so there's like this existential moment where you're like, is what I'm doing important?
Right.
Because society doesn't necessarily view it that way. So it's strange. It's funny you mentioned that. I wrote like a blog post about how I was feeling about this, like way back when. I don't know, like 2014-ish. And the only person to comment on it was a major that I used to work with at one of my last Air Force squadrons. In summation, he's like, look, the purpose of what we do is what you do. Go make American art. Like, you defended America. Great. Go make American art. And that was really cool. Like, I still have that comment saved somewhere as like a way to kind of reorient me.
Then how do you feel about that? Do you feel just as purposeful doing this now?
I do. There's a lot of conflict that comes internally with working for the military, working for the government. It's a giant, violent, bureaucratic machine that has a lot of things wrong with it. And so, the things you do aren't always like top of your morally bright list. So it's nice to be free of that. And it's also great to hear the feedback from fans and people all over the world that were like, hey, your role as such and such helped me get through blah, blah, blah. And I can't remember which particular role this was talking about, but someone was saying that like, hey, your role as this person who had lost their mother really helped me get through losing mine. And like those micro, like that's like a major impact on a micro scale as opposed to like, major impact on a macro scale, which is what I was doing previously. So it's just a different form of impact that is in some ways, I think, much more important. I think if we did a little bit more work on the micro impact, that we wouldn't have to make macro impacts as much.
Has having that impact in people's lives and being able to sort of shape who they are ended up impacting you as well?
Yeah, I would say that it's allowed me to be, I think, maybe a more empathetic person. Just hearing that feedback of like, hey, what you did made me feel this way. I can kind of like enter that human-to-human communication point of view feedback loop that is really important for understanding people of all different walks of life and all over the world. It's really helped me kind of open up my view on humanity as a whole, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all can appreciate empathy as something that we don't underscore enough in our society, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about empathy and happiness and how people feel about themselves, obviously the content that we watch and take in has a huge part to do with who we become, because it's who we identify with, right? So, when it comes to your own happiness, do you find that you're more influenced by the people that you're playing and you're creating in your worlds, or are you more influenced by the people who talk about those characters?
I would say I'm probably more influenced by the people who talk about them, because even though the characters are real-ish for me, they're still not real in the sense that like another human being and their feelings and their reaction to that media is real. So there's a tangibility that comes with interacting with fans that have been impacted by my work, that it's just not the same as like being in the booth and being like, okay, I am, Achilles who has done this.
Right.
It's not quite the same.
Makes sense. How has it been going out into the world and meeting people who love these characters versus, Joe, and you have to sort of segment that off in your brain. How has it been sort of transitioning in your own mind between sort of these different characters that live and breathe inside of you?
I try to keep it very, very grounded, especially when I'm talking to people. Like I will never approach anybody as Fox or Claude or Bumblebee. Like
Right.
that's not who I am. It's a story I told.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all of those stories come from a part of me, and those characters reside somewhere in me as a part of my persona. But I try very hard to interact with people as a very normal nerd. Like I think the thing I say most often, like people get nervous, right?
Yep.
People get nervous and they come up and they talk to me and they're like, some people are like visibly shaking. My like line is usually, we're just nerds doing nerd things over here. Look at us. We're at a convention surrounded by cosplayers. Like we're, just chill. Like we're just people.
Do you find the nerd culture and the convention circuit to be part of your happy place?
Oh, for sure. I am at my happiest, I think, when I'm surrounded by nerds and nerd culture. It's awesome. Yeah, I remember the first time I went to MagFest, which is a music and gaming festival, if you're not familiar. And it's all based on video game music and reimagining of video game music. And like, I remember getting there and meeting all the people in Overclocked Remix, who I then ended up becoming very good friends with, and I'm on staff there still, although I don't do a whole lot. I remember being like, holy crap. This is just me all over the place. I've never seen that before. I didn't know people gave a crap about this stuff. Wow. Like I felt like I really fit in. It was really awesome. I am definitely at my happiest and steeped in nerddom.
I'm sure there's a lot of things that kind of help you get to that nerd place and happy place as well. When you're thinking about happiness, have you figured out what some of the keys are to achieving your happy place? Or do you find it's just an ongoing search?
I use the phrase a lot, always happy, never satisfied. And that puts some people off. But what I mean by that is like, I try to always be happy with where I am, but never satisfied with where I am. There's always someplace else to go. There's something to experience. And that doesn't necessarily mean like I'm always like in the middle of a midlife crisis where like, oh my God, I need to go experience lush, Bali, tropical. I need to buy a Porsche. It can be as simple as like, I need to experience more of this relationship with my kids or my parents or my friends. There's always more to dig into, and I try not to get complacent or satisfied with where I am, but I always try to focus on like, I am happy with where I am and who I am. That doesn't mean that I don't want to change or move around to different areas and talk to different people. But so yeah, always happy, never satisfied is a little bit of my motto.
Do you think we can ever really truly be satisfied?
No, I don't think life is about like, well, again, it all depends on how you define this stuff. But in my brain, I don't think life is about satisfaction. I mean, you can be satisfied with your lack of satisfaction
Right.
in that, you're satisfied in pursuing things and always trying to grow and learn and love people around you in new and different ways. So I don't know. I guess it's in the eye of the beholder whether or not you say like, okay, I am now satisfied. I can die. I don't know. Like what happens when you are satisfied? I haven't reached that point yet. So
I think a lot of us are sort of in that same boat where you don't know what satisfaction will be because our brains are very good at reminding us constantly that we're unhappy. And that's something
True.
that a lot of people struggle with. So I would love to know for you, as somebody who keeps completing projects, how do you deal with the moving goalpost of life and just constantly being like, all right, I did this thing. I'm a big name character. All right, now on to the next. How do you transition?
I think staying present, while not always super easy for me, just as like a kind of a future-oriented, goals-oriented person, staying present is a key to being happy. Like you have to let yourself be in that moment, feeling whatever it is. And that could be something positive or negative. If you're in the middle of tragedy or sadness, like letting yourself feel that stuff. That's life, man. All of it. It's all life. There's no point in trying to push any of it aside. So whether it's a moment of joy or a moment of sadness, letting yourself feel it, experience it. Like you're in the live stream, man. Swim in it.
Mm-hmm. I can tell that you are someone who feels passionately just looking at your body language, talking about being in the moment. Like you are definitely like something you feel strongly about. Do you have some stories in the back of your mind where you were really just trying to live in the moment?
I mean, all moments I'm trying to live in. I don't always do a great job. It's something that I've been struggling with probably the most since I got into a creative field, since I moved into the gig economy, if you will, because I'm always chasing something, right? A lot of times I feel like I don't give myself the space to be like, yeah, that was awesome. And like, yeah, this just feels great.
Yeah.
So I don't know. One thing that helped me is a lot of different studies, and I'm going to get kind of nerdy in academia here, but like,
that's why we're here.
Reading a lot of Joseph Campbell, who was a famous mythologist, if you don't know who he was. Getting into, I was in a PhD program for a little while on mythological studies, and depth psychology, which kind of like takes the stories and the stuff that's in there and kind of pulls it out. Those studies for me were really helpful in understanding that like it's all life. You can be present in all of it, and you shouldn't try to like push any one thing away because it's not as palatable as the rest. I don't know if that answers the question, but
hey, there is no wrong answers on this podcast. We are here to learn.
It's early yet, Steve.
That's true. It's early. We'll find out. We still got like 3 hours to go. So when we're talking about psychology, has that been a love of yours as you've been getting older and sort of trying to understand the human condition?
Yeah, and I would say psychology, not in the sense of like understanding mental illness or mental health, but understanding, as you said, the human condition. Like, what does it mean to be human? What's going on in all of us? Why do we connect in these weird moments of synchronicity that can't really be explained? I'm a big believer in the idea of like a collective unconscious, that there's some sort of like underlaying mental soup that we're all kind of pulling from and dipping our toes into at different points. And sometimes we'll make a little drop in the water over here, and somebody 4,000 miles away will feel that drop. And that is often done through storytelling. As someone looks at a character that was written in a country, in a culture that's totally unlike their own, they go, whoa, that's me. So yeah, well, so psychology in a clinical sense isn't necessarily part of my life, but depth psychology, to use that term that word's doing a lot of work in that sentence, but very liberally.
It makes sense though.
Yeah.
And I think we all can sort of maybe not have ever thought of it in the same way that you're saying here, but I think we've all felt how society as a general being has like a mood, like where everyone is tense or, going through world changes. Everyone is like, feeling burn or feeling tired. Like, there's definitely times when I think all of us can imagine like, wow, all of my friends have said they're tired recently. That's really odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like how that's something that we don't really think a lot about. When you're talking about consciousness and in humans, do you feel like fate plays a part in that? Does fate exist?
Fate, I think, is a broad term that can encompass anything like God or karma, or like it all, I think, speaks to a similar idea that we're not necessarily the sole captain of our ship. So I don't know that there's like something written for each of us that we're just sort of reciting the lines in somebody else's play. I think there's a whole lot of improv. But I think that there's times and elements where you feel like, at least I have in my life, where, and I'm paraphrasing, I think from Jung, that there is someone, I'm a player in an orchestra being conducted by some great hand. And, my life has changed so rapidly and so often, and that it's hard for me to ignore the idea that the universe is pushing me in one way or another, and I can choose to resist that, or I can choose and like make my own way, or I can choose to kind of go with it. And I found that the moments where I resisted are the moments where things get really screwed up. So whether or not, like I said, it's preordained, or if there's just sort of like a gentle nudging in this like pulsating mass of life energy that is humanity, verdict's still out.
That's fair. So would you say you're more of a go with the flow kind of guy?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask my kids, maybe not.
That's entirely
Maybe
fair.
not.
It's entirely fair.
Yeah.
All right, so then let's go from that and let's really dive into where you're talking about being a creator and being that heavily conscious person who has to think of these different worlds that don't exist because they only exist in your own mind. You know, what do you feel like makes a good character, like for both someone to read and learn from as well as for yourself?
I think that, you can learn things from all characters, even if you don't like them, because if they're not reflective of your own point of view, then they're helping you learn about somebody else's. Nobody really, good characters aren't written in a way that like no one can relate to. Even if it's not you, someone can probably relate to that character. I say this phrase often, that nobody is the villain in their own story.
Nope.
No matter how crappy of a person you think somebody is, or the atrocities that they've committed, even in like the most extreme instances, that person's never going like, I'm so evil. They're like, I'm doing this for the right reason and everybody else is freaking crazy. So making a character relatable, I think, is the most important thing when you're building any kind of creative foundation. And that relation also comes from that person's environment. I think that environment, there's a whole nature versus nurture argument. I think environment is one of the ways that characters are uniquely shaped, which then drives the plot. So I think that there's kind of like that, not to get too technical into like how to make a story, but I think that like if you create an environment, or if you use an environment that's already available and you create some interesting circumstances, you're like, okay, how does a rational person grow in this sort of environment, and what sort of outlook do they have on life? And then how does that make them act? And so like making it a natural progression just makes it easier for people to relate to them, because they'll look at that character and go, okay, I understand that person's point of view. I understand why they did what they did, even if I don't agree with it.
I can't remember the FBI agent that said it, but there's a famous FBI agent that said everyone is the protagonist in their own story, no matter how evil they are. And that really stuck with me, thinking back through life lessons of history, when people who did atrocious things really thought that they were the good guy. And that's something that I think helped me understand a bit about myself as well. As sometimes when I thought I was doing the right thing, maybe I wasn't, or maybe I was going about it the wrong way. Have you found that there's times where you have learned lessons by sort of doing things the wrong way and been like, yep, that was wrong? And like,
oh, totally. The converse of everybody is the hero in their own story is you're the villain in somebody's.
Yep.
You know what I mean? No matter who you are, you're the villain in somebody's story. I know I've been the villain in people's stories, and trying to look at that from that other person's perspective teaches me to be a kinder, more welcoming and open person, and be like, okay, I understand why they don't like what I did, or they don't like me. And then you have to choose, like, okay, do I change my behavior based on this anecdotal example, or can I look out? Can I kind of get do a little bit of metacognition, look out and see myself seeing, or see myself feeling, and how do I change to adapt to that?
What do you think's the catalyst for that change? Like, where is the line when you decide to change?
I think that whole idea of metacognition, of the ability to step outside of yourself and look at yourself as an objective, like non-personal entity, someone else that's not you, super helpful. Also incredibly difficult, and I screw it up all the time still. But I think it's a skill that everyone should develop, is taking a step back and trying to view their own lives from an objective meta sense.
Being introspective is one of the hardest things I've ever had to try to learn and try to teach others. It's not easy.
For sure.
Especially, Greg Miller was sitting in your chair not long ago. Not your literal chair, but your figurative one. I'm the one. Didn't want you to think he just broke into your house and he was hanging out.
What the hell, Greg?
Right? And he was talking about how, a lot of people like to make a mistake and apologize for it and then move on like it never happened, and how we can't do that. We have to be cognizant that nope, we messed up, and if we don't want to do it again, we have to make sure that we learned from that lesson.
Definitely.
Do you think that there are lessons that you've learned along the way that you can think of you were like, you know what, this was a turning point for me right here when I learned this?
I would say that being exposed to such a gigantic volume of people all at once was really pivotal in me starting to understand a lot of different points of view. Everybody only has access to their environment and the people within them. But once I kind of got bigger on Twitter and had a following and started talking to people at conventions, you start to learn a whole diverse range of different stories, and a whole, like different people that, for you, something may not be a big deal. And for somebody, it's like the crux of their universe. And you don't think of it that way until you're presented with a story, in this case, a person that educates you into somebody else's point of view. So I would say that being exposed to such a large mass of people online all of a sudden was really educational in understanding like how people think, how people who are very different from me think. And it's been really awesome and also really hard sometimes.
Let's talk about the hard times. How has it been growing a presence online? Have you found it to have some strife?
Yeah. I mean, like I've made some missteps in the way I speak or the way that I interact with people because I take Thanksgiving dinner, like in a loud, brash, sarcastic family that was always like, we were nitpicking at each other because we thought it was funny. And we all had like super thick skins. And it was like, you really couldn't insult someone bad enough that they would actually get upset. Not everyone's like that, as I learned.
No.
And it's just like, learning how to take yourself out of your own environment. We're talking about the characters coming up out of that environment, to step back, look at yourself as an actor in a larger cast of characters and how that attitude would be reflected on by people who don't have that experience. It's difficult because there's also this part of you that's like, no, I'm going to be who I am. And I was like, well, who you are sometimes sucks. Like occasionally you suck. So maybe adjust fire a little bit.
So are you an amplified version of yourself when you're doing streaming and Twittering and whatnot? Still the same you, just a different amped version of it?
I would say the opposite almost. Like when you're in a public forum, you have to, what is the word I'm looking for here? You have to shoot kind of at like the most common denominator. So like the way I am, which is just pretty much like a very brash, no BS, sarcastic dude, I have to kind of tone that down because I understand that people would react poorly to that. And it's not their job to adapt to me, to my style. It's my job to integrate into society. That's what we all do. We sign a social contract that say, I'm going to be a little bit of me and a little bit of you, and we're all going to mush together until we, come up with something that works for everybody. It's like a social compromise. So I wouldn't say that my streaming or online personality is an amped up version of me. I wouldn't say it's like heavily censored, but it's certainly like adapted to dealing with a larger common denominator than my loud Italian family.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Everybody has different facets of themselves. And, something I'm very fond of is that the version of you that you create of me in your head is not my responsibility. I'm not responsible for what you think I am. I can only be responsible for what I actually am.
Right.
Have you had a lot of times interacting with the public where you've had that moment of recognition when you see somebody's facial expression or their response to you and you're like, okay, that was a wrong step, and then tried to course correct?
I can't say I've felt that way in public, where I said something and then like saw somebody react to it, and I was like, oh. I mean, I've seen it in like my personal lives, and in my I don't have that many personal lives. My personal life.
Maybe I'm asking the wrong questions here. How many lives do you have?
Hold on. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it in my personal life where I've said something. Actually, it just happened like yesterday where I said something to somebody and I was like, that was a bad idea. And like I was operating out of just kind of like the wrong sphere. And I was careless for a second. You hurt somebody's feelings and you got to figure like, okay, I was careless here because such and such and such. I got to peel back and see what I can do to make this right and not repeat the behavior. So yeah, I think that answers what you were asking me.
Yeah, absolutely does. When we're talking about teachers and how we've learned, who has been like some of your really good mentors and role models on how you decided you wanted to be as a grown-up Joe?
I take I don't have so many like, I want to be just like this person. Mm-hmm. What I usually do and have done my whole life is like, I want this person's drive. I want this person's kindness. I want this person's ability to like understand people's emotion. So it's kind of like you pull parts from different people. Weirdly, the first person that popped into my head when you asked that question was Chris Hackney. Chris is like very kind and understanding. And like I look up to him for that, the way that he can just be like so almost like bluntly kind with people. Never like bitter, and it's just the way he interacts with people is really cool. And I have another Tim Ferriss. If you're familiar with him,
Mm-hmm.
I love his efficiency. I love the way that he like dives into things and breaks them down to their most simplest parts and then rebuilds them and becomes an expert and stuff. Dude was like a national champion tango dancer in 6 months. Like I love that about Tim. So yeah, it's just pulling different things from different people. My dad's sort of sense of justice. He always does the right thing, even if it's not the best for him. He just always wants to make sure that he's doing the right thing. Those are kind of like just different things I pull from different people.
The Captain America philosophy of life, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just making. I am Voltron, and everybody else is the Lions. Like I'm just making different versions of Voltron.
Has that affected the way that you're writing your own characters? Not the ones that other people have written for you, but the ones that you're actually coming up with yourself. Do you sort of lean on that experience, or do you use that to sort of explore that space?
Sure. I mean, like, I think every author is stealing from the people around them when they write characters. Sometimes it's like a complete ripoff of, I've written stuff where like, that is exactly that guy. I took that guy from my Air Force career and I put him in mechanical failure.
Right.
Like that is that. All I did was swap the name. And there are some times where just like me, I take different pieces of people and I'm like, oh, I want that guy's sarcasm, or I want that woman's strength. I want to put that in that. So yeah, the more data you have, just like I was talking about before with being exposed to so many people all over the world in different kinds of walks in life, that's all data. You can pull different pieces from all different things to create realistic, memorable, relatable characters and settings.
Did being sort of in the Air Force with all those different experiences you were given, do you think that really helped shape not just your personality, which is sort of a generic question, but the experience of not the Air Force, but the people you met along the way end up being part of that Voltron?
The people I met like along the way in the Air Force?
Like, yeah, from the people you worked with to the civilians you met to the jobs you had to do, as opposed to the generic question of, did being in the armed forces change you? Of course it did. But how did the meeting the people along the way really expose you to more walks of life, as they say?
It was fun to see as I got through the Air Force that everyone is not so like a generic rubber stamp personality. A lot of people will very easily pigeonhole me into like, oh, you're a military, you're a super conservative, structured dude who works out a lot, and all like that's not me, and that's not all the people I've met. It was really cool seeing the different types of people that I ran across in the Air Force that you wouldn't expect. I work with folks all on the LGBTQ spectrum that were not allowed to talk about it at the time, that would either confide in me or I only found out about it later. Work with people who ended up being in like polyamorous relationships, lots of people who were on the way left side of the spectrum, just different people, all who just kind of came together in this one point that was the Air Force, and were in it for different reasons. They came in for different reasons. They stayed for different reasons. So even though it is a microcosm, I was always happy to see how diverse that little microcosm can be, even though, it's like there's a sameness to it.
Yeah, you all felt
but also very diverse.
Like you all felt the same calling, but you all got there in different boats, so to speak.
Totally.
Yeah. Do you feel that also sort of changed how you felt you were being judged by the people around you? By what are you doing? Did you end up having your own standards?
What do you mean by that?
So whenever I think about who we are as people, right? We're always constantly measuring ourselves up against who we were the day before or the year before, and oftentimes what people can get caught up in is the judgment of others, trying to, again, shape that image of yourself in someone else's mind. And in the Air Force, you obviously have a very regimented life, something that, has to be done certain ways. So you sort of get used to that routine, right? So I'm very curious, how you yourself ended up viewing who you are, who you became, what parts of what Voltron you ended up starting to be, what was the underlining standards that you ended up starting to value above the others?
I think that the military career for me, it had it had some character implications, but it had more, I think, practical implications for me, which was like getting things done, focusing on a particular task, looking at what you're going to do in a hierarchical sense, looking at your strategic objective of, I want to be a voice actor. And then looking
Right.
at like, okay, there's nothing in that sentence that you can control. You can break it down into operational and tactical objectives of like, I'm going to do this every day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to contact this person. I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And then having it trickle back up into, okay, does what I did here, is this affecting my strategic idea, my strategic objective? Because if not, it's a waste of time in this sense, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, and just like being very matter of fact with a lot of things. I think that's kind of what the military did for me. It was like a disciplined organization. I mean, here I am talking about how I don't want to be stereotyped, and I'm like, military gave me discipline. So,
Well, I think
yeah.
that it's fair to say that, your standards come from various places in life. Socrates, know thyself. I mean,
Exactly.
when you're talking about yourself, what do you think is the most important thing to learn about that? Is it how to be efficient, kind, empathetic? Where does Joe's values lie?
I think they have changed radically all over the
Yeah.
years. A lot of younger me was, the value in Joe is his contribution to this big giant machine that was the Air Force. And as I get older, I realize that a lot of what's valuable about me is how I interact with other people. It's the relationships that I have because we make the story together. You can only be like those one dude climbing the mountain for so long before you freeze to death.
You're right.
It's more about learning a bigger point of view through experiencing the stories of other people, through being kind and keeping space for people's emotions and all that kind of stuff that's sort of like new age and woo woo, but I think is a super important part of the 21st, like our 21st century realization of what it is to be a human. It's not so much about like survival. We've got that down, I think, for the most part, compared to, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
It's about relationships. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm learning to value more as I get older, for sure.
How have you learned to keep watering those plants and keep those relationships alive?
That's hard because I'm a pretty ambitious, driven person. So there are a lot of times where, like, if I'm hanging out with someone, there's a guilt that's like, oh, I'm not doing something productive. But letting that go has been work that I've been doing for, I don't know, at least 3 years now. And it's been tough, but it's all about like making the time, understanding the difference between what's important and what's urgent.
Yeah.
Everything's important. What's urgent? Like, what do you need to do right now? If it's not urgent, then call somebody up, go have a beer. Call a friend, call your mom. Go hang out with your kids. That's what it's about.
So, do you believe in the phrase, I'm sorry, I just didn't have time for that?
No, I don't. I think that when you're saying, I don't have time for that, what you're saying is, I chose not to spend my time on that. Because we are all originators of our own time. And you can make choices to fit in whatever you want to fit in, I think. I mean, there's real tangible barriers of you need sustenance, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need to survive. But at some point, you're making a choice. I have said that phrase, I don't have time, all the time. It's been bullcrap every time I said it. I have the time. I'm choosing to spend it on other things.
Have you found that you are very skilled at calling bullcrap on yourself?
I've become better at it, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think an important part of the whole relational aspect is finding other people that will call you on your bullcrap. It's important to have outside voices that kind of let you know, like, hey, that's not, like your gap between your ideal and your reality is getting pretty big there.
Right. I would totally agree with that. When you're talking, they say we all have 7 best friends, and then you have a bunch of acquaintances. Do you think that you have selected people around you who are fairly good at calling you on that? Do you kind of need someone pushing you back to, no, Joe, come back over here?
I have, and I do, but that's I think a part that I'm working on. Yeah. When you said 7 best friends, I'm like, oh wow, do I have 7 best friends?
That's what they say. We all have 7 people who are closest to us. I don't know if I believe that or not, but
well, sure. Like, you can rank anybody in like, there are the top 7 people that are closest to me. Are they what you would consider like ride or die best friends? I'm not sure. And that's been one of the things that I've been trying to invest in, like making sure that you put time into those relationships. You call your buddy and say like, hey man, how's it going? What are you doing? How's life?
Would be nice
So,
if
yeah.
that was a little more accepted in our society. Have you had any instances where you found yourself sort of fighting against that weird pressure that we have, where it's like you're guys, you're supposed to go have a beer and swear at things instead of having a close heart-to-heart talk?
I don't in a general sense, because like when I go have a beer with a dude, I don't go and swear at things. We talk about feelings. Like I've never had a situation where like I go to a bar and I talk about sports, and like that's never been my group. That's not my in group. So usually if I'm going to hang out with a guy friend, we'll talk about whatever we want. And we'll, like the better the friend, the deeper it'll get. As a man, yeah, sure, I've definitely felt the pressure that like men are not allowed to feel and men are not allowed to emote. You have to be this strong, stoic dude that nothing bothers you and you can never have like a moment of weakness. But in the finite example of like hanging out with other men, I found it pretty easy to not feel that constraint.
That's
And I feel like I'm
fantastic. That's actually very enlightened. It's a lot of people I've counseled over the years have had that sort of phobia where they've been scared to be open with other people, whether it's a man, woman, or non-binary pal. It is something we struggle with, especially in American society, when we try to be
for sure.
very independent here. We try to be very self-sustaining. Yeah. Have you had much luck with counseling people to be as open as you are?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a shining example yet. It's something that I've been working on so like I try not to like you be like me. Like, no,
Joe,
you gotta be better. You gotta be way better than me. I've spent many years holding my cards close to my chest because I didn't want to come off as vulnerable. I didn't want to come off like I didn't want people to, like abuse my emotional vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I would say over the last year, really almost specifically over the last year, I've just been like, screw it. I'll tell anybody anything. Like I don't care. Like I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable. Like this is who I am, and I'll talk about anything. I don't care what it's about. I'm pretty like with close friends.
Yeah.
I don't keep my cards close to my chest anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not worth. I don't have time for that.
So where is the Joe of today on your story arc? If you had to put it in like plotting terms, where do you think you are?
I probably somewhere between page 250 and 275.
Okay.
I don't know. I think the Joe of today is smack dab in the middle of a very stereotypical Jungian individualization arc where, like you start to drop off. I mean, I'm young. I'm 36. I'm not exactly like an old fogey here.
Right.
But there's a point at which in like the arc of a typical life, you start to rely less or value less that like virile youthful power.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of go more into like the relational understanding feeling aspect, and I feel like I'm really right in the middle of that right now. That's where I think I am.
Yeah. What are you still trying to work on that we haven't touched on, or do you have thoughts that you're like, I need to work on this?
Really, I still think it's mostly a relational aspect for me. It's about looking at the drive and ambition that I had that got me where I am, being like, okay, little buddy, you did a great job. I'm going to move you to second place right now. You keep driving the engine, but I like the people in my life are what I really want to focus on.
That makes sense. So we talked about friendship, and sometimes people have difficulty making friends and figuring out who they want to be in that it's MySpace top 8. So what does Joe do in order to sort of find those people that can fit in there?
Lately, what I've been trying to do is, again, I find that if I try to force things, it doesn't work very well. But I try to be very open to the flow of life so that I demur a little bit less. I say no to things a little bit less that I don't think, like there's that hard line, like, okay, is this going to be productive? Is this going to take away from my productive time? No. I'm fairly antisocial. I don't go out very often. I'm very much introverted. I want to stay in my own space. I don't leave my house that often. I just that's me. And letting that fall off a little bit is kind of where I'm working on it. Being able to say no to myself and say yes to other people. Whereas a lot of times that was very inverted.
That is actually a great philosophy. What have you found yourself saying yes to lately that has helped?
More time outside doing stuff that has nothing to do with my career, has nothing to do with my hobbies. And many times, like, it's just, I'm going to go waste time with people, which in and of itself is a bad definition. It's not wasting
Right.
time, but like, I just want to go sit on a couch and do nothing with somebody all day, or like just play games or whatever. Just something that's not productive.
Obviously, in our society where we put so much emphasis on being productive, that is not an easy task. Have you developed any tips and tricks to share with how to be better at just focusing on the relationship and not on the almighty dollar?
This is going to sound contradictory, I think, but I've had to get really good at disappointing people. So like if somebody's like, hey, and this is like such an LA thing, like, hey, I have an improv class, or I have an improv group. Do you want to join? No, I don't. Like, I don't want to go to class. Like, I don't want to do table reads and stuff like that on a Thursday night. Like, I don't want to go to a networking thing. I don't want to, present company excluded, be on a podcast, like different things that like kind of reach in and pull on that productivity time and like you're still on.
Yeah.
I've been just staying a lot more like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. I've been turning down a lot of work, just trying to free up my calendar and work less. Like, I don't want to be doing 14-hour days.
I think that's a hard lesson for a lot of people to learn. And as we were talking about before the podcast, one of the things I've spoken about before, having the reason for this podcast, and I'm very specific, as Joe is my witness, is, I told you, this is not about work. We're not going to talk. We're going to mention what you have done because it's a great achievement, but we're not going to focus on that because that's not who you are. You are not your work. And I find that is so hard for so many of us in these capital societies. Nothing against capitalism. If you're a capitalism person out there, I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is that we put too much focus on it. And we really sometimes forget that at the end of the day, if you earn $1 billion, but you have no one to spend it with, was that a life well spent or was that a long life you spent? And I think we have to focus on that.
I agree with you. And I think that having lived on two sides of that chasm, it was easier for me to separate myself from my work when I had a 9-to-5 job. Like I could just go home and then it was illegal for me to talk about my work outside of work because it was all classified,
Right.
which is great. I could never take my work home. It was awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah. I could never take my work home ever. And even though like Air Force officer seems like way more of an identity than like actor, it's way harder for me to separate me from what I do now because I'm constantly having to use who I am to project out into the world so that like I'm interacting with fans, so that casting directors see my work. So I'm producing content. So people contact me and they're like, oh yeah, I remember Joe because I saw him here. Well, like now I have to use Joe as part of my career. Whereas in the Air Force, I feel like I could use Joe's skills as part of my career. So it's even more difficult now for me to separate me, like who I am from what I do, because they're so tightly intermingled. And I don't want to use the word like weaponize, but like I have to use my personality to influence what I do. Otherwise I don't get work,
Absolutely. I think it's hard to tell what a demographic for any show is like this, but I would say predominantly the people who are listening to this show probably are fans of either mine or yours, and that's why they've come here today. And I think that's safe to say a lot of those are creative types. So along that line, have you found the secret to the sauce? How do you continue to network, continue to blossom, continue to do all the things where you have to use yourself, but not let yourself be used up?
I try not to force it. I find that if I sit down and I'm like, oh man, I've got to create YouTube sketches because my YouTube channel took off and I had the anime video that had 6 million views and it was fantastic. I got to do more. I have to. I should. That word should, I hate that word. There's, God, this sounds so pretentious, but I think it was Nietzsche. It might have been Nietzsche who was talking about the phases of life, right? Because this ties in what we were talking about before about like where I am in this arc. That like when you're young, you're a camel. You say, put a burden on me, you get strong. Other people put stuff on you, you carry a load and you get strong enough so that eventually in middle age you become, I think it's a lion, where your job becomes in middle age to go hunt the dragon, right? We're getting very ethereal here. But what he says is on every scale of that dragon is written a thou shalt. Something in society that is compelling you that says you should. And fighting against that, man, that's hard. That's super hard. But it's a really important part of trying to figure out, you're saying like, what's the secret sauce? How do you maintain that balance? Is you got to fight against the should. If you're doing something because you should do it, think real hard. Think real hard about why you're doing it if you think you should.
So what is the motivating factor for you? If it's not should do this, what do you find keeps that fire lit?
I find it's just like whatever, that sounds a little hedonistic, but like whatever makes me happy. Lately, I have dove headfirst back into music, which is basically my first love. It is, when I am doing music, I feel very, very different from when I'm not doing music. Like there's a clear line in between Joe with music and Joe without music. And I find that when I go without it for too long, I get really grumpy. I get depressed. And then when I banged out like, I don't know, 5 original songs in the last 2 months, just because I just went back in and I was like, screw it. No, it's not a waste of time. It's what makes me happy. And then I come back, I take that energy and I bring it to those relationships, as opposed to, you know, like there are other endeavors in my life where I feel like, oh, I should. There have been times with my stream where I'm like, I set the schedule. I should stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But it's like by the time I get to the end of Thursday, I'm like,
right.
And so, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to find that balance.
Let me ask you, why do you think that we have almost put a negative connotation on fun and happiness? As an interviewer, but also as just a human who likes to talk to people, I hear that a lot. I hear a negative, like you just said, I don't want to be hedonistic, but like there's that hesitancy in your brain, like I don't want to admit out loud that I'm doing something to make myself happy. Why do you think that we've developed that?
What an awesome thing you just said. I don't want to admit out loud that I'm doing something to make myself happy, because I think that encompasses a whole lot of what people think when they're talking to people. Now, this is, I'm not trying to generalize. I know this is a very specific Joe problem, but I know lots of other people experience it. There's this whole idea about like the Jungian shadow, right? There's parts of your personality that like you don't want to deal with it. It's just kind of like buried there. And it just kind of remains in what he calls your shadow forever. And if you don't deal with it, usually around middle age, it comes out and punches you in the face. I was talking to maybe like 8 months ago, a year ago, I was talking to my ex-wife, and I was like, I think I figured out what my shadow is. I think it's joy. And she's like, well, that's pretty odd.
That's dark.
I was like, I think it is. Not in like a dark way, as in like, you know, like I feel no joy. It's more like there's that part of myself that I'm refusing to acknowledge, that joy, feeling joy and being okay with it, or being okay with doing something because I like it, not because it makes me money or not because it advances some part of my career or whatever. I think that for me and for many other people, I'm not saying that I'm special. I think that the shadow of their lives is joy, and they won't let themselves experience it. They kind of push it away. They're like, okay, that's for later. I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to deal with that later.
Yeah. You always think you can suffer now and have joy later.
Yeah, we're okay with delaying gratification on so many things, which can be beneficial. You know, like you don't want instant gratification to rule your life, but joy should not be one of those things on that spectrum, I think.
I think a lot of the people out there could agree with that. And I absolutely love how this conversation has turned deeply philosophical. Do you have a laundry list of, you know, obviously as a well-read individual, of philosophical people that everyone out there should be checking out?
I'm a huge devotee of Joseph Campbell. I think everyone should read The Power of Myth or listen to The Power of Myth. It's an interview series between him and Bill Moyer that was recorded in the, I think, late 1980s, right before Campbell died. I think it's a very good primer into the idea of storytelling and what stories do for us. He doesn't make it overly technical. It's not like reading Campbell's books can be very technical. Like if you don't have a background in what he's talking about, it's like, whoa, buddy. Even me, who does have a background, a lot of times, like I don't understand what the hell he's talking about. But The Power of Myth is you can get it on Audible and listen to him and Bill Moyer. He's got a wonderful voice. I think he reminded me of my grandfather, which was always just very endearing to me. But yeah, I think everyone should kind of start there. Otherwise, like depth psychology and philosophy can be so esoteric and like just super academia infused. We're like, dude, you could have said this. All you're saying here is to treat people nice. Why did you spend 6 paragraphs using, $20 words to do that? Just talk normal. But that's another topic of my problem with academia.
Academia certainly has its drawbacks, and I certainly had some arguments with people who wanted to think about things instead of taking action. I mean, I have a career in advocacy, and that's obviously I wanted to do action now, not do a study about it for 40 years.
Yep.
But obviously each has its own pros and cons. I think for me, one of, other than Aurelius and all of the great philosophers, for me it has been continuing to pick and choose what philosophies worked for me. It has been this idea that you have to be a follower of one person has never been something that sat well with me. It's always been whatever makes sense to me.
No, that's called a religion.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
yeah. Exactly. And for me and my teaching, I always try to tell people, I hope you skip around, even in a podcast like this, that this is what Joe and I were talking about at minute 17, boring the crap out of you. Great, go to 33.
33 was great,
33 was amazing, yeah. But having that sort of ability to throw away the things that don't make sense for your life and add the things that do. Have there been things that are popular in society as far as teachings and philosophies go that you have been like, what, that's just not for me?
Oh, of course. I mean, I tell people about this all the time. I went to church for many years, not as a Christian. I was not a Christian, but I went to church because it was kind of like what I did. I volunteered at a church that I found because I liked what they did. They were always out in the community, welcoming people and just helping people. Didn't matter that I wasn't like a Christ follower, whatever. But the Bible is like that, right? If you got to take everything wholesale, oh man, are you going to be stoning prostitutes at the same time that you're same time you're feeding starving children? Back up, buddy. Right. The whole Bible is not for human consumption all at once. Take the part where Jesus taught you to be kind to people and use that, just take that and then go away with it. I think that all things are subject to being picked apart. I've read a lot about Buddhist philosophy. There's a lot in there that I really disagree with, but there's a lot in there that's very, very helpful for anybody going on a path of individualization or learning how to relate to other people. I just wish there wasn't so much as an emphasis on asceticism. I think asceticism is not helpful. That's kind of my philosophy. So if you were saying there's one particular piece that always bugs me, it's asceticism. If you're going to go be a monk in the wilderness, you better come back with something awesome for society. Otherwise you wasted the life that was given you. Great. Okay. You can go meditate on a rock for 30 years, but if you never talked to anybody about it, what did you do? Yeah. That was all for you, buddy. Yeah. It's not so selfless. And that's my little dig at asceticism.
I think that's an okay phrase in that you're basically saying, share your wisdom that you've learned. And that, again, is one of the founding principles of this podcast is you have made great triumphs in your life. You have great victories. You have 6 million videos. You have 100,000 followers here and there. You have done by society standards, good milestone marker things, but you've learned lessons along the way. And that is what I hope that people take from a podcast like this and from reading people like the ones that you suggested, is that honestly, I think we learn more from failure than we do from watching success.
Agree.
I agree. There's a lot of things out there to learn. When we're breaching that subject about, failure and success, do you feel at this point like you've still got a lot left to learn?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if I knew all I knew, like I was saying way back at the beginning, if I knew everything, I guess I'll just die now. What's the point? What's the point? I'm 36. Thinking back to myself as even just last year, the last year you thought you knew everything, and then the year before that you thought you knew everything, and you're always being educated that you do not. I hope to. This is somewhat analogous. Now I can't remember who the cello player was, famous cello player who was 90 something years old. And some interviewer asked him, he's like, well, you're 90 years old. Do you still practice every day? And the cellist was like, yes. And the interviewer was like, why? And the cellist was like, no, I think I'm making progress. It's just
the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? You reach a point where you think you know everything and you find out, oh crap, I don't.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I would literally keep talking to you about this for another 3 hours if we had it. We have reached the hour and 10-minute mark, which is over time because you're just so darn insightful. It's a pleasure.
Well, thanks. It's been fun talking to you. This is a very non-standard interview, and I really enjoyed my time with you, Stephen. It's been nice to finally meet you and say hi face to face, so to speak.
Face the screen. I appreciate you getting to hang out. We have one more segment for you to go through. This is the lightning round. Are you ready? Have you ever seen Inside the Actors Studio? Okay, no. Great. Then you're in for a surprise. They have a lovely set of 10 questions that ramp from super easy to very deep. And I am just going to ask the question. I'm not going to interject. I'm not going to say anything about what you say other than a giggle here or there. It's all up to you how long these answers are. Ready?
Fire away.
All right, here we go. What's your favorite color?
Blue, like a dark blue, midnight blue.
What's your least favorite?
Yellow.
What's the best thing you've ever tasted?
Ooh, there is a pizza in Naples at a place called Sorbillo's, and I think I remember asking the person that was with me that, like, I need you to stop talking until I'm done with this pizza. Like, it was like a religious experience. That was one of the best things I've ever eaten.
Best answer of this entire interview.
That and the sushi at Tsukiji Fish Market in Tokyo.
Okay, you'll have to tell me about that off stream. What's the worst thing you've ever tasted?
Boiled rabbit lung.
I'm sorry, what?
Boiled rabbit lung.
I heard you. I couldn't absorb it. Okay.
Survival school was a bitch, man.
Oof. Okay. Have you ever loved?
Yes.
Have you ever hurt someone?
Of course.
What can somebody do to earn your trust?
Keep their word. Do what they say they're going to do.
What can somebody do to lose your trust?
The opposite of that. Do one thing or say one thing and do another.
If someone spoke to you the way that you speak to yourself when no one else is around, would you be friends with them?
Probably. I talk to myself out loud all the time, and who would it really bother? There's somebody in my life that's really bothered by it. But like I'll do the thing where, like, you put the cereal box in the refrigerator and then the milk jug in the pantry. And I go, "Oh, you friggin' idiot." Like, I do that all the time, and I have no problem with it. I don't have too much self-deprecating talk that's, like, genuinely, like, hate myself.
Okay. If you died tomorrow, what do you hope people remember you for?
Man, I probably hope that my kids remembered me as a good dad.
Do you have a personal life philosophy that you would attribute to getting you to where you are right now?
Probably. But what that is, I don't know. I feel like I had it. Like, if you had asked me, like, a month ago, I'd be like, yeah, this is like this is my life motto. But now I can't remember what it was. The first thing that popped into my mind was don't sweat the small stuff. But I sweat a lot of small stuff, so that's just bullcrap.
Calling yourself on the bullcrap.
I'm just calling myself on my own bullcrap. I sweat less small stuff now than I used to, but... Yeah.
Joe, do you think that some things are better left unsaid?
There's part of me that really wanted to just stare at the camera and not say anything. But I didn't know how that was going to play. Yes, absolutely. I definitely think some things are best left unsaid.
Joe, thank you so much for being on My Name Is.
Thank you, Steven. This was awesome.